Well, howdy folks, it's Matthew, your friendly neighborhood technician, making another video for you out of Boise, Idaho. So I've had this 2005 Nissan Sentra Spec V Type R now for a while. Actually, I've been working on it, and so it's really time to get this thing finished up, get it back on the road. So today I'm going to show you how to put the cylinder head back on. It's not that big of a deal, and the steps that I'm going to show you, you could use for any four-cylinder, cylinder head, Toyota, Nissan, Ford, whatever it is that you're working on. Just make sure you always check with the manufacturer for whatever type of vehicle you're working on, and make sure that there's no special steps or anything. But in general, you can pretty much use this video whether you're working on a Nissan 2.5 liter engine or a Toyota 1.6 liter engine. You can use this video to understand how to lay a cylinder head back down. Now, there's a few things that I want to point out to you. First of all, while you have your cylinder head off, you have to send these cylinder heads out to the machine shop, so that way they can put new valves in it for you, maybe make sure that the cylinder head is planed properly and all that other good stuff, shave it, machine it, whatever you want to call it. Longer story short, while the cylinder head is off, you may get some condensation or moisture or atmosphere inside of the cylinders themselves, okay? And if you do, you're going to see this, what looks like rust on the cylinder walls. That is not a big deal. Do not worry about that. I've put many of engines together that have that on there. What you want to do is just take you a little bit of parts cleaner, spray it on a rag, and wipe it off. But if you don't get it off completely, it's not a big deal. Just oil it up real well. Again, take a rag, soak it in oil it up real well on the inside, make sure you get any debris and gunk out of there. Another thing that I wanted to show you is always make sure that when you're dealing with a cylinder head and your camshafts are installed, always make sure that you prop your cylinder head up on something and you don't lay it flat. The reason why is because with camshafts installed, as you can see, the valves protrude past the cylinder head itself, or the plane of the cylinder head, okay? And so if I were to lay this down flat, I could very possibly nick, or worst case scenario, bend a valve, not know it, lay my cylinder head down, and then before long, after I spend all the time putting it all back together, I have no compression in one of these cylinders, and it could be because I laid the cylinder head down flat and bent a valve myself. So when you're at home doing it yourself, I always like to make sure that I have a couple blocks of wood to prop the cylinder head up on. So I'm going to go ahead and get those two cylinders cleaned up and oiled up, and I'm also going to go ahead and get my cylinder head moved out here. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is get this cylinder cleaned up. So I'm going to take a little bit of oil. Well, actually first, before I take a little bit of oil, I'm going to spray a little bit of cleaner on my rag. Not going to go insane on it, and I'm just going to wipe it off. Okay, you can see you're going to get some of it off, but you're not going to get the stain off. That's not a big deal again. It's not going to destroy or hurt anything. Alright. Now that I got that kind of wiped off a little bit, I'm going to take a little bit of oil, get it on my rag. I'm going to oil that cylinder head, or that cylinder. Same thing here, I'm going to wipe the wall down with oil. Any oil that I get on the top here I want to wipe off. And now that's nice and oiled back up. That's not dry anymore. And at this point, and at this moment, I'm going to go ahead and take a dry rag. Make sure I have any dirt or debris or anything off of the block surface here. Actually, I do want to get just a little bit more oil on the inside of here. There we go. Now, I'm personally happy with that now at this point. Okay, so at this point, again, make sure you got any debris or anything off of there. Let's go ahead and lay our head gasket down. Now, I'm using a Felpro cylinder head gasket set, and it'll tell you which way to lay this in because you'll see it'll say up. So that means you want this side up. I'm going to go ahead and lay that in. And we want to make sure that every porthole is exposed and that there's nothing blocking any of these coolant holes right here, and that you're in good shape to go. So now the next thing to do is going to be go ahead and set your cylinder head down on there. Now, as you can see, I've got mine set aside on the blocks. So now we're going to go ahead and lay in the cylinder head. And when you're laying in a cylinder head, you really want to try to do it all in one good smooth motion. Come on. Make sure you're lined up with your head gasket. And here we go. Now, our cylinder head is on there, and we're in good shape there. So, the next step is going to be getting our cylinder head bolts installed. Now then, you probably noticed that I have my camshafts installed. If you watched the previous video on how to properly reinstall your bucket lifters and do your valve adjustment before reinstalling your cylinder head, you'll know why. And in that video, I mentioned do not torque the camshafts down just yet, because you're going to have to uninstall them to either A, readjust the bucket lifters, or to B, also properly reinstall the head. So we're going to go ahead and take our camshafts out now. And they're not torqued down. And if you notice the pattern in which I am removing the cam caps, this is how you want to do this. You want to start from the middle and work your way out. And the reason why we need to uninstall the cams is because we need to make room so we can reinstall our cylinder head bolts. Now, some machine shops will go ahead and do the valve adjustment for you. It's just a matter of what you ask of them and all that other good stuff. I adjust valves myself. I let the machine shop install the valves, but I go ahead and do the valve adjustments myself. So there's nothing to it. Once you get them loose, you're good. The reason for doing it in the pattern where you start from the middle and work your way out is so if there's any pressure from the valves and the valve springs pushing up on the camshaft, you can warp your camshaft by uninstalling it incorrectly. And that's something you don't want to do. And you also won't know if you warped it until you try to restart it. You spend all that hard time and work putting it back together, and next thing you know, your vehicle doesn't start right, or you damage the engine or something like that. So we're going to go ahead and get the camshafts uninstalled. And we're going to set them aside. I'm going to try to keep all the cam caps in the order that we took them off. So I'm going to go set this aside now. Make sure I grab that bolt that I dropped. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. Start from the middle. Loosen it. Work your way towards the outside. And again, this is why, if you're going to do your own valve adjustment, you don't torque it down just yet. Because you're going to have to uninstall and reinstall these camshafts a few times during this job. Alright, now that everything is loose, and honestly, if you ultimately wanted to, before you lay the cylinder head down, you can just uninstall the camshaft while it's on the bench. It's up to you. That one just wanted to jump right out of there. But I got one of these cut. There we go. Alright, I'm going to set this one somewhere safe. Alright, now that I got those camshafts set somewhere safe, it's time to go ahead and work on installing my new cylinder head bolts. Now, when you're installing cylinder head bolts, first of all, never reuse cylinder head bolts. There's a reason why. Cylinder head bolts in general are what we call TTY bolts, torque to yield. So what that means is that when you torque these bolts down, when you use your torque wrench and you torque them down to whatever vehicle you're working on calls for, let's say it calls for 100 foot-pounds. So if you torque that down to 100 foot-pounds, once you get to 100 foot-pounds, the bolt is actually made to stretch. And so when you uninstall the cylinder head bolt, it actually technically will never properly torque back down. And you can get in trouble by doing that. I've seen people not replace cylinder head bolts, and then a year later, they've got a head gasket failure. So always make sure you replace your cylinder head bolts. Another thing is, when you're installing cylinder head bolts, go ahead and soak them in oil. Okay, so that way they go in nice and smooth and you don't have an issue there. Okay, so I've got my torque wrench, as you can see, and I've got it set to 30 foot-pounds. Now, some vehicles and manufacturers are going to have you torque cylinder head bolts down in a sequence, and sometimes that sequence may require you to torque to 30 pounds and then turn to 0 degrees and then torque another 30 pounds. In order to do that, you're going to want a special tool called a torque angle gauge, and I haven't used mine in quite a while, and I can't find it right now, so I may have to go pick one up. You can buy a torque angle gauge at your local parts house like AutoZone or O'Reilly's. They normally don't cost any more than about $7 to $15, depending on how nice of a one you buy, and you can go from there. So right now, all I'm doing is tighten these by hand. I'm not going to torque them down. You're not going to hurt anything by tightening this by hand. Another thing, just some advice and information, never use a torque wrench to take a bolt out. Torque wrenches are only meant to travel and run direction, and you can really mess up your torque wrench by using it to remove bolts. So, and when it comes to a click type torque wrench like this one, it needs to be serviced every now and then, and you want to check with whatever manufacturer you bought your torque wrench from so you know how to properly service your torque wrench. So that way you know that you're actually torquing it to the proper specification. So the sequence on this is going to be 30 foot-pounds, torque it down to 30 foot-pounds to start off with. Then you need to have your angle gauge ready and torque it down to 0 degrees. And then after you've torqued it down to 0 degrees, you're going to want to go back and bring it up to what I believe is going to be around 45 foot-pounds on your second pass. And then after that, you're going to want to torque angle it again with your angle gauge. And I apologize for not having mine here. I'm going to have to stop eventually here and go get one, or find mine somewhere in the arsenal of my tools. Then you're going to want to use your angle gauge and torque it down to 90 degrees. And then the final step is going to be 85 foot-pounds on this engine. So right now I'm just hand tightening this. Before I get my torque wrench out and run my first 30 foot-pound pass. So that's what I'm going to do next. Well, it looks like I need to make a run to the tool store. I don't have the right adapter for my foot-pound torque wrench. And so to make my first pass on here, I'm going to go ahead and use my inch-pound torque wrench. Now the first pass is going to be 30 foot-pounds. You can get online and pull up a converter calculator, I guess that's what you want to call it, and convert 30 foot-pounds to inch-pounds, which is going to be 360 inch-pounds. So after I'm done running this first torque pass, I'm going to go ahead and stop and make a run to the tool store, pick up a few tools, and then keep moving forward. So what I'll do is I'll put all the work that I've done on this Nissan cylinder head and engine into a playlist for you guys. And the next video that I make on this, I'll pick up from my first pass of 30 foot-pounds, where I'll need to use my torque angle gauge and torque it to 0, and then make another pass with my torque wrench, and then torque it to 90 degrees, and then make another pass. So hopefully that doesn't confuse you too much. So 30 foot-pounds is not a whole lot. 360 inch-pounds, you'll hear it click. There it is. All right, and that's our first pass of 30 foot-pounds, also known as 360 inch-pounds. So now I need to go buy a new torque angle gauge, and I need to get an adapter for my foot-pound torque wrench, so that way I can go in here and finish this up. So I'll go ahead and start the next video on this Nissan cylinder head from there. And we'll get this vehicle done and get it up and running. Well, everybody, I really appreciate you coming and hanging out and watching my videos. If you need any help, just give me a holler. Leave me a comment in the comment section. I really try very hard to answer your questions. I'm starting a new video segment where once a week I just go through the comments and answer your questions the best I can. You can also email me at highgrooveauto30@gmail.com. That's HIGH auto, AUTO, the number 30@gmail.com. If ultimately you need to, I have no problem trading phone numbers with you and talking to you over the phone, walking you through a procedure, asking you any questions that you may have. Well, once again, thanks for coming out and watching me. This is Matthew, your friendly neighborhood technician, signing off.